The storm rolled across the valley like a beast let loose from heaven, lightning clawing at the mesas and rain carving veins through the red earth. Out of that violence came a man, half-conscious, blood trailing from his ribs, his horse long gone to the wind. He stumbled beneath the weight of thunder, boots sinking in mud, until the world tipped sideways and the dark swallowed him whole. When he woke, it was to the soft crackle of fire and the murmur of voices he didn't understand. Two women's tones, low and urgent, whispering between fear and mercy. His hand reached for a gun that wasn't there. Outside, the storm raged like a secret kept too long. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the unseen wilderness listened, holding its breath, waiting for dawn to tell what kind of man had found shelter among those who should have left him to die. The night deepened, the fire shrinking to a red pulse in the dark. The stranger's breathing steadied, though each rise of his chest came with a sound between pain and prayer. Nahi sat against the wall, knife in hand, her gaze never leaving him. Talina dozed beside her, exhaustion softening the fear that had gripped her since they found him. Outside, coyotes sang to the retreating storm. In the spaces between their cries, the land itself seemed to hold its voice. When Luke muttered in his sleep a woman's name, lost in the wind, Nahi's expression changed. Not pity, not anger, something caught between the two. A question the dawn would have to answer. Before the first light broke, Nahi left the lodge. She stepped into the wet silence of the valley, her moccasins sinking in the soft mud. The scent of juniper and wet ash filled the air. From the ridge, she could see smoke rising to the east. White man's fire, too close for comfort. She knew what that meant. Patrols, scouts, perhaps worse. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bow. Behind her, the stranger slept beneath her roof. And every drop of mercy she'd shown him could now cost her father's wrath. Or her life. The rain had washed the blood from his coat, but not from her conscience. Inside, Talina stirred as the light changed. She crept to Luke's side, watching his lips move in a half-dream. She whispered words in her own tongue. A quiet blessing her mother once taught her. His eyes flickered open, confusion clouding them, and she stepped back. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. The girl and the dying man, two souls on opposite sides of a border neither of them had drawn. "Water!" he rasped, voice dry as the desert itself. She hesitated, then lifted the gourd to his lips. The small act, so human and simple, felt heavier than any oath. Nahi returned as the sun crested the canyon rim. Her expression was hard, her silence louder than any storm. She crouched beside Luke, checked his bandage, and met his eyes with something like warning. He tried to speak, but she shook her head. "No words," she whispered, voice sharp as flint. The world beyond the valley was shifting, riders moving, laws breaking, the kind of danger that carried no name. The sisters exchanged a look that said everything. The stranger stayed until he could stand, and then he'd go. But fate, like the desert, rarely lets go of what it finds in the night. The rain had left the earth breathing steam, the air heavy with the scent of sage and smoke. Luke woke to the sound of a pestle grinding corn, the rhythmic pulse of survival. His vision sharpened. Woven walls, clay pots, two silhouettes moving in silence. Every breath came like fire through his ribs. He knew where he was now, and what that meant. The Apaches didn't take in enemies, not without reason. He tried to sit up, but pain anchored him. Nahi's shadow fell over him. Her expression gave nothing away, neither welcome nor threat. Talina watched from the corner, torn between curiosity and fear. In that fragile space, words would have been the most dangerous thing alive. Hours passed beneath a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain again. The sisters worked around him, speaking little, their movements deliberate, efficient, born from generations of ritual. Luke watched the fire dance between them, the language of survival written in every motion. He tried to say thank you, but found no word that fit between them. In the silence, he began to understand. Mercy wasn't given here. It was loaned. Nahia's eyes flicked toward him once, sharp as the edge of a blade. That look said, "You're alive because I let you be." Beyond the hills, distant thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from riders on the move. By late afternoon, the sun bled through thinning clouds, and heat shimmered off the stones. Luke's strength returned enough for him to limp outside. The valley spread before him, vast and quiet, the kind of silence that made a man feel small. He turned toward the sisters' lodge just as Nahi stepped out, bow slung across her shoulder, eyes locked on him. "You walk," she said in broken English, voice flat as the plane. "You walk, you go." The words hit harder than a bullet. He wanted to tell her he couldn't yet, that the wound would split open. But he saw in her stance no room for pleading. Talina stepped into the doorway behind her, hope flickering in her gaze like a candle in wind. That night, no one spoke. The fire cracked softly, its light carving small islands of warmth in the dark. Luke lay awake, listening to the sisters breathe. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl called. A warning, or maybe a prayer. His mind drifted to the man who'd shot him, the man he once called brother. He wondered if Amos Pike was still out there, tracking him through the canyons like a dog following blood. He felt the pull of it all, the violence, the debt, the ghosts he carried, and wondered what it meant to be saved by those the world called enemies. The silence between him and Nahi felt heavier than any chain. Before dawn, voices echoed from the ridge, men shouting in English, laughter carried on the wind. Luke's blood ran cold. Amos Pike's voice was among them. He pulled himself upright, swaying, breath ragged. Nahi appeared at the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her eyes knowing. She didn't ask who the men were, she already understood. "They look for you," she said quietly. He nodded, shame written across his face. "Then you hide," she added. No warmth, no forgiveness, just the blunt truth of survival. The sisters moved quickly, covering his bedroll with pelts, stamping out the fire. Outside, horses snorted in the dark. The laws of shelter had just been rewritten. The night thickened like smoke, pressing close around the small lodge. Hoofbeats echoed across the valley floor, measured, unhurried, hunting. Luke could feel each step through the ground, the rhythm of a man who knew his quarry was cornered. Talina's hand trembled as she pressed her ear to the wall, whispering words Nahi barely caught. The sisters exchanged a glance. They'd hidden strangers before, but never one marked by war. Luke's breath rasped in the dark, and for the first time, fear softened Nahi's iron calm. Outside, Amos Pike's voice carried low and steady through the rain-soft wind, calling Luke's name with mockery that cut through the stillness like a blade across hide. Inside, the fire guttered, its light dancing over faces that shared nothing, and yet, for this single heartbeat, everything. The sound of horses faded for a while, but none of them breathed easy. Luke whispered, "They won't stop." His voice was a rasp, dry and broken. Nahi looked at him sharply, understanding little of his words, but everything in his tone. Talina, unable to bear the silence, asked softly, "Who come?" Luke met her eyes, shame and truth mixing in one look. "A man who kills what he can't own." The sisters understood that language well enough. Nahi stood, stringing her bow, eyes cold. "Then we hide not for you," she said. "We hide for us." Her words struck him harder than a bullet. He was no guest here, only a danger that had crossed their threshold. As midnight deepened, Luke found strength enough to stand. His side burned, but he refused to stay helpless. Nahi tried to push him back down, but he caught her wrist. Not in anger, but desperation. "If they find me here, they'll burn your home," he whispered. Her eyes narrowed, Yet something in his face stopped her from striking him. For a long moment, the world was only their breath. The closeness of two people who had no business sharing the same air. Then, through the silence, came the low creak of a saddle. The riders had stopped outside the canyon mouth. They were waiting for light, waiting to finish what they'd started. The long hours before dawn bled into silence, broken only by the crack of cooling stones and the whisper of wind through the juniper. Luke sat awake, watching Nahi sharpen a knife against flint, the steady rasp echoing like a heartbeat. Talina had fallen asleep again, exhaustion winning over fear. The fire had burned down to coals. Luke spoke softly, telling the older sister about a ranch once green with grass, now ashes after men like Pike passed through. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened. He saw it then. The same pain behind her stillness, the same ghosts walking the edges of her eyes. The distance between them narrowed, not by choice, but by truth. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, the stillness broke. A single rifle shot cracked across the valley, echoing through the cliffs. The sound made the earth itself flinch. Nahi and Luke moved at once. She grabbed her bow. He reached for a pistol half buried in his coat. Talina cried out, startled awake. Smoke drifted through the doorway. Too much for one gun's shot. They ran outside to see the ridge lit by fire, smoke rising from the east like a warning. Pike's men were setting signal flames. The hunt had begun, and as the light spread over the red stone, it painted the three of them in the same fragile color. Caught between worlds and running out of night. The smoke from the ridge had thinned by the time the sun rose full, painting the valley in sharp relief. Every rock, every shadow laid bare. Luke sat outside the lodge, his side wrapped tight, revolver resting across his knee. The sisters worked in silence, their glances quick and wary. They'd survived the night, but the day promised no mercy. From the canyon mouth came a new sound, not hoofbeats this time, but the steady rhythm of a single rider. The sisters froze. Nahi's face hardened before she spoke. "Father." The word cracked the air like thunder. Luke felt the weight behind it. Honor, law, and something older than both. The rider appeared moments later, his horse black as obsidian, his eyes the color of dusk. Chief Tenaya had come home. Tenaya dismounted without a word, his presence filling the valley like a storm that didn't need thunder to announce itself. Nahi bowed her head but didn't move to meet him. He looked from her to Talina, then to the lodge, where the stranger sat half in shadow. His silence was the kind that weighed more than words. Finally, he spoke in his own tongue, his voice deep and slow. The sisters answered softly, voices breaking against his calm. Luke couldn't understand the language, but he understood tone. The way the man's hand brushed the hilt of his knife, the way the younger girl trembled but didn't run. When Tenaya turned his gaze on him, it was not the look of a man meeting another. It was judgment staring into flesh. The old chief entered the lodge, stooping beneath its low arch. He walked slowly, his eyes tracing every sign of the night's trespass, the ashes still warm, the stranger's blood, the moved pelts. Luke forced himself to stand, though pain clawed at him. "I didn't mean harm," he said, his voice quiet, steady. Tenaya didn't reply, didn't even glance at him. He spoke to his daughters instead, his words quiet but sharp, and Luke saw the tears in Talina's eyes before she bit them back. The chief turned then, eyes narrowing on Luke as if measuring his worth and finding the scale empty. "You bleed," he said finally in accented English. "You should have died outside." The sentence held no malice, only truth. Outside, the wind shifted. The smell of smoke still lingered from the ridge fires, mingling with sage and dust. Tenaya stepped out of the lodge and faced the horizon, saying nothing. The sisters waited behind him, Luke a few paces away, his breath shallow, one hand pressed against his wound. The chief spoke then, not to his daughters, not to the stranger, but to the land. He spoke of trespass, of balance, of the thin line between mercy and weakness. His voice carried over the rocks like an old hymn, older than fences or rifles. When he turned, his decision was already carved in his eyes. When the sun rises again, he said, the white man leaves. If he cannot walk, the ground will carry him. That night, the fire burned low again, its light fragile as the trust between them. Luke sat near the edge of the lodge, feeling the pull of exhaustion and dread. Nahi tended to her father's horse outside, her movements sharp and silent. Talina slipped to Luke's side, her voice a whisper. He will not change, she said. He believes mercy is a wound that never heals. Luke looked at her, seeing not the child she had been, but the woman standing at the edge of two worlds, too brave for either. He wanted to thank her, to promise something beyond the dawn, but promises were luxuries for men who had tomorrows. Somewhere outside, Chief Tanaya stared into the stars, waiting for morning to judge them all. Dawn broke like a slow wound over the horizon, red, raw, and silent. The valley held its breath as the first light touched the lodge. Chief Tanaya sat before the fire, unmoving, his daughters kneeling nearby. Luke stood outside, the cold morning air biting through his shirt, his side throbbing where the bandage clung to drying blood. He knew what sunrise meant. He'd heard it in the old man's voice. Death had a time, and this was it. The sisters said nothing, but their faces carried the ache of choice, between blood and mercy, law and love. Luke closed his eyes, not praying, just remembering. The faces of the men he'd killed, the woman he'd lost, the soil that never forgave. When he opened them again, Tanaya was watching. "You ready?" the chief asked quietly. The question sounded less like a threat and more like a test. Tanaya rose slowly, every movement deliberate. The chief's knife gleamed faintly at his belt, the kind of blade that carried more story than steel. "The old law," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "says those who bring danger under this roof must pay with their blood." Nahi's head bowed, but she did not flinch. "We did not know," she said softly. "We saw a man dying, not an enemy." Tanaya's gaze stayed on Luke. All dying men are enemies of someone. He stepped closer, and for a moment, the air felt too thin to breathe. Luke didn't step back. "If you kill me," he said, "you'll be doing his work for him. Amos Pikes." The name hung in the air like gunpowder smoke, and something changed in Tanaya's face. Tanaya's silence stretched long enough for the wind to shift again, carrying the smell of horse sweat and gun oil from beyond the ridge. "Pike," he said finally, tasting the name like ash. "You know him?" Luke asked. The chief's expression darkened. "He hunted us once, killed my brother for a bounty." The old man's hand fell from his knife. For the first time, his eyes softened, not from mercy, but memory. "He hunts you now?" "He's close," Luke answered. "He'll burn this place if he finds I was here." Tanaya turned away, his thoughts unreadable. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "the law waits one more sunrise." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was breath. The day burned long and slow. Luke helped repair the corral fence despite his wound, his every movement watched by Nahi's wary eyes. The sisters spoke little to each other, their words drowned in the hum of cicadas and the weight of what morning might bring. Chief Tanaya sat apart beneath a juniper, sharpening his blade but saying nothing. As the sun sank, Luke caught the chief watching him. Not as prey, but as a man measuring another. When darkness fell, Tanaya finally spoke. "If this pike comes, you fight beside us. Not for your life, for theirs." Luke nodded once. No oath, no hand extended. Just a man's promise carved from silence. When night fell, the wind carried the faint jingle of spurs and the low murmur of men's laughter from somewhere beyond the canyon. The sisters froze, Even the fire seemed to shrink. Tenaya rose, bow in hand, eyes narrowing toward the sound. "He comes," Luke whispered. The chief gave a slow nod, then looked toward the stars. "The law will wait no more. At dawn he meets his death. Or we meet ours." Nahi and Talina exchanged one last glance. Fear and faith tangled together. Luke's hand found the revolver head cleaned by the fire. The decision had already been made. The only question left was who the valley would bury when the sun rose again. The first shot cracked before the sun breached the ridge. Sharp, merciless, a tear through the silence. Luke dove for cover as splinters of dry wood burst from the fence beside him. Nahi's arrow flew a heartbeat later, striking true into the shadow of a rider's silhouette. Horses screamed in the dim light, the chaos of gunfire unraveling across the valley floor. Chief Tenaya's commands cut through it all, his voice steady, thunder in a storm of lead. Luke moved beside him, firing in rhythm, his wound forgotten in the need to survive. The sisters darted between the rocks, gathering arrows, carrying water, eyes blazing with something far stronger than fear. The dawn they'd awaited with dread had come, and it demanded blood for peace. Amos Pike's men fanned out across the valley, their shouts echoing off the red stone. Pike himself rode high on the ridge, rifle in hand, watching the battle below with a predator's call. Luke saw him between bursts of smoke, same gray beard, same eyes that had once shared laughter across a campfire. "You should stay dead, Carver!" Pike's voice rolled down like thunder. Luke's reply came not in words, but in gunfire, a single shot that chipped the rock inches from Pike's boot. Below, Tenaya's arrow found another rider, dropping him before he could reload. The old chief never looked away from the fight. His movements were poetry written in blood and dust. The battle turned when a torch hit the thatched roof of the lodge. Flames licked up the walls in seconds, smoke coiling into the brightening sky. Talina screamed, running toward it, but Nahi caught her arm. "No!" she hissed, eyes fixed on the blaze. "It's too late." Luke saw it too. The home that had sheltered him, now burning as a beacon for death. He limped forward, firing until his pistol clicked dry. Tenaya's voice rang out, "To the river!" The command snapped through their fear. Together they moved, ducking through smoke and bullets, the sisters dragging water skins, the chief leading them like the ghost of an old war come to life again. They reached the riverbed as the gunfire followed. The current ran high from the week's storms, frothing white against the stones. Tenaya motioned for the sisters to take cover behind the fallen logs. Luke knelt beside him, both men breathing hard. "They'll circle behind," Luke said. "They'll come from the south." Tenaya nodded once. "Then we meet them halfway." It wasn't a strategy. It was instinct. Two warriors bound by necessity. Pike's riders appeared moments later, shouting, their reflections breaking across the river's surface. Luke's first shot dropped lead man. Tenaya's arrow followed, splitting another's throat clean. It was no longer Apache and Cowboy. It was two men standing against the same dark. When the smoke cleared, only Pike remained. He stood on the far side of the river, rifle in hand, his horse gone, his men scattered to silence. The two men locked eyes across the current. The hunter and the hunted, the ghosts of a war no one had won. Pike raised his rifle. Luke's gun was empty. The world slowed to breath and heart. Then a sharp whistle split the air. Tenaya's arrow flew true, striking Pike through the chest. The old man lowered his bow without a word, watching as Pike staggered backward, fell, and was carried off by the current. The valley grew still again. Smoke drifted upward in lazy spirals. The sun, finally free of the ridge, lit the river like molten gold. When the gunfire faded, the valley fell into a silence so complete it felt sacred. Smoke curled over the river, carrying the scent of burnt cedar and blood. Luke sat on the stones, hand pressed against his ribs, watching the current swallow what remained of Amos Pike. Chief Tenaya stood at the water's edge, his bow lowered, his eyes lost in the reflection of the dead. Behind them, Nahi and Talina moved through the ruin, gathering what could be saved, whispering soft words for the fallen. The rising sun broke fully through the canyon, spilling gold over the red cliffs. For a long time, none of them spoke. The war that had come in the night had left no victor, only the living and the ghosts they carried. The chief turned to Luke at last. "Your war is done here," he said, voice quiet but unyielding. Luke nodded, though he wasn't sure which war the man meant, the one fought with bullets or the one that never left the soul. Nahi approached, dirt streaking her face, her expression unreadable. "You cannot stay," Tanaya continued. "The law remains even when the blood has cooled." Luke tried to rise, but the pain dragged him down again. "Then I'll die on my feet trying," he said. For the first time, Tanaya's mouth curved. Not a smile, but something close to it. "You already have," he answered. The sun climbed higher, blinding in its mercy. Nahi spoke then, her voice carrying the strength her father's silence had left behind. "He cannot travel far," she said. "He will die before the next ridge." Tanaya looked at her, his face carved from patience and pain. "Then the spirits will find him." But she didn't yield. "And if they don't—" He studied her a long while, then turned his gaze toward the sky. The wind stirred the ashes of the burned lodge, sending them into the light. "Then, perhaps," he said softly, "they will find me instead." The words hung there, neither forgiveness nor surrender, but something both had needed. For the first time, Nahi's eyes filled, and she looked away. Luke rose slowly, his body trembling, his breath ragged. He looked at the sisters, then to Tanaya. "You could let me die," he said. The chief regarded him with the calm of stone. "You were already dying when you came," he replied. "What you do after this is yours to choose." Luke nodded, the truth of it cutting deeper than any wound. He turned toward the open desert, the same path that had once brought him ruin, now glimmering in the heat of dawn. Talina stepped forward and pressed something into his palm, a small carved feather, smooth and warm from her hand. "So, you remember," she said. He looked down at it, unable to speak. By the time the sun reached its full height, Luke was gone, his figure a fading shape against the horizon. The sisters stood together, their hands clasped, while Tanaya remained at the river, his reflection rippling in the current. He whispered a prayer to the wind, not for the dead, but for the living. For the daughter who defied him, the stranger who earned his respect, and the world that would never again be simple. The wind shifted, carrying the faint rhythm of distant hoofbeats that soon became nothing but echoes. Above them, an eagle circled once, then vanished into the blinding light. In the end, the valley kept its silence, and the law of mercy became the only one that mattered.